my channel, Talking with Timaiah. Today we'll be covering Chapter 2 of the Law School Journey, and I'll be talking about how to prepare for the LSAT. Okay, so in my opinion, the LSAT is one of the most important steps to the law school process. A good score can determine whether you get a scholarship to a law school and whether you get accepted at all. So it is extremely important to prepare for the LSAT. There are a lot of people who go in and say, for the first time that I take the test, I'm going to just see how I do. Absolutely not. Do not waste nearly $200 to see how you do. You need to really prepare for the LSAT because it pretty much determines your future if you want to be a lawyer. So the first thing to do when preparing for the LSAT is to take a CoDiagnostic test. So what a CoDiagnostic test is taking a previously released LSAT test and just doing it like you would do the real test. It's considered a CoDiagnostic because you haven't prepared for the test up to that point. So when taking the test, what you will do is just take it and time yourself. However, if the time does run out, which is 35 minutes per section, you continue to go. You complete the test, and once you're done with it, you score the test. The score that you have, don't allow it to scare you. It typically is a lower score because you haven't prepared for the test up to that point. Once you get that score, you have an indication of where you are with the LSAT, and from there, you can begin to study. Below, I'll put a link to a free CoDiagnostic test that you can use. This is a test that has been issued by LSAT. So once you're done with completing the test, you can use the score sheet at the back of it, and you can just get an idea of where you are with the LSAT. If you're serious about law school, once you get that CoDiagnostic score, you're going to want to begin studying immediately because the scores are typically discouraging due to the lack of preparation. So the method of studying is what I'm going to talk about next. There are some people who jump right into an LSAT prep course. All you have to do is Google LSAT prep courses and a dozen of LSAT prep companies will come up. However, my suggestion is what I did myself, and I feel like it did work for the most part. The first thing that I did was I purchased the PowerScore Trilogy, which was a logic games book, a logical reasoning book, and a reading comprehension book. And what I did was a self-studying method. On PowerScore, they have so many options for self-studying. You just look at your time frame that you have. So typically people utilize 3 months to study for the LSAT. If you don't have that much time, they have 1 month options, they have 2 month options, and they even have more than 3 month options. So you can look and get an idea of what some study schedules they suggest are. However, what I did is I studied every single day. And what I did was one day I would study for logical reasoning and logic games. The next day I would study for logical reasoning and reading comprehension. The reason why I study for logical reasoning every day is because on the LSAT there are 2 sections of logical reasoning, 1 section of reading comprehension, 1 section of logic games, an experimental section which can be either of the 3, and then a writing section which is not scored. So logical reasoning is pretty much 50% of the scored portion of the test. So studying for that and getting a good grasp on that is really important. Now, there are many companies that have pretty much the equivalent of the PowerScore Trilogy. I know Kaplan is one company that has that as well. I believe there are several other companies who have pretty much books that break down the test by each component and then have sections for you to see how you're doing. So pretty much sample questions that can help you see how you're progressing with the material. One thing that I suggest is if you don't want to pay $100 for the trilogy, or you don't want to pay a lot of money and you're not sure if it matches your learning style, if you Google it, a lot of the books have PDF versions of the book. It might not have the entire book, but it will have some content so that you can read it and see if it fits your learning style. Purchasing the PowerScore Trilogy, I believe on the website, is about $100 or $130. I'm not exactly sure. But a suggestion that I have is you can find the books on Amazon. You do not necessarily have to have the newest edition. The LSAT hasn't changed that much over the past 2 or 3 years. So if you do get 2014 or 2013's edition, you should be perfectly okay. The content is pretty much the same. I don't believe they changed it that much for it to really matter. So if you want to get a cheaper option, you can look at an earlier edition. So what I did to prepare for the LSAT is I self-studied from May until the 4th of July. This was last year. So after the 4th of July came, I felt like I was a bit more familiar with the material. I had went through PowerScore. They broke down each of the sections for me. And following that, I continued to study the PowerScore Trilogy. However, into my LSAT schedule, I implemented a practice test every single week. Now, practice tests is what differentiates the people who score in the 160s and the people who score in the low 130s. Practice tests are so helpful. If I could have done 100 more, I would have. What practice tests are is pretty much the test. The LSAT does not change much in format. So questions that I have done on practice tests, I have seen questions so similar on both of the LSATs that I have taken. It is so important for you to implement the practice test into your schedule. On LSAC.org, they have the books of 10 previously administered LSAT tests. So what you can do is purchase one of those books or even two of those books and implement those tests into your study schedule. Next, I'm going to talk about how to review your practice test. Okay, so when taking a practice test, you want to make sure that you're taking it under testing conditions. So that means that you're taking it in a place that's quiet, like the library. You're using the Scantron that comes with the test booklet so that you're familiar with filling out the Scantron with the limited amount of time that you have. You want to make sure that you're timing the test. There are several apps out there, and I will do a video on LSAT resources, but there are several apps out there that have an LSAT proctor, which will tell you when to start the test and tell you when you have 5 minutes remaining or 1 minute remaining, and that is extremely helpful. It also has a noise option where you can put pencil taps or coughs or sneezes, which is pretty much what you're going to hear when you take the LSAT. It's not a completely quiet room. There are humans in there who make really weird bodily sounds, so the apps also have that feature, which is very helpful. So you want to just be sure that you are in your zone when you're taking that test, because that is often an indication of how you'll do on the test. Each of my practice tests that I took following heavy review of LSAT material were 5 to 7 points off from what I got on the actual LSAT. So it is pretty accurate gauge of how you're going to do. So if you feel like your score can improve, you just continue to study, review material that you feel like you're not doing well on, and you just want to make sure that you're actually taking the test like you would on actual test day. So how you review your practice test can determine whether you get a high score on test day or a mediocre score. Review is the most important part of the practice test. So there are various methods that you can find online of how to review your practice test. The method that I utilized was the blind review method. So what that was is I completed my test under time conditions, and following that I just went back and looked over each question and answered them in a different colored pen or pencil. So that would allow me to have more time to fully look at the questions and understand what they're asking, because as you know, the test is timed and you don't have a lot of time. Each section has about 25 to 27 questions and you have 35 minutes to do it. So you do run out of time. It happens. So sometimes you're rushing and you're just answering questions, because it is important to answer every single question. You never want to leave any questions blank on the LSAT. So I would just go through it and see whether my answers differed or not. Once I did that, I would use my score sheet and see how I did under time conditions. And then after that, I would see how I did under untimed conditions. Following that, there are several blogs that have students who are asking questions about that particular LSAT test. So I would go through it and see how they explained the answer to the questions or how they tackled the question, and from there I would just see how it was different from what I did. So you want to make sure that you spend a substantial amount of time reviewing your test. The method that you use can depend solely on what you want to do, but I just want to ensure that you look at every single question, not once, not twice, but even 3 times, just to fully understand what they're asking. And then from there, you see what questions you're weak at, you see where you're lacking, and you can go back to your textbook and see how they explain it, or you can look for another source and see if they can explain it differently, because maybe the way that they're explaining it in your textbook is not really helpful to your learning style. So review is extremely important. Don't take a test to get your score and then start taking another test. That doesn't help you. At that point, you're just wasting your time and your money, because the book is about $25 for the 10 actual prep tests. So you want to take the test, understand the test, and not make those same mistakes again. Following my summer of self-review and taking my prep test, I felt like I could use a little bit more help, a little bit more structure. So what I did is I paid for the Power Score online prep course. The course was $1,000, and It was actually exactly $995. And I will be doing a video on my experience. Let me say this clearly, my experience with the prep course. People have varying experiences. Some people do it during the summer, so there's less distractions than they might have had during the school year. My experience is something I'm going to talk about in a separate video. It helped me in some ways. They gave me a lot of material. Every single previous LSAT test that has already been released. The material, though, was very similar to what I had already purchased with my Power Score Trilogy book, so a lot of it was redundant and I had already covered it, but they did explain it in a different way than I had got when I studied on my own. So in some ways the test was, or in some ways the course was helpful. In other ways I feel like maybe I should have done a little bit more research on other prep courses out there, because like I said, there are dozens of companies who offer LSAT prep. Some of them are cheaper, some of them are more expensive, some of them are in classroom courses, some of them are online like the one that I did. So I feel like I should have done a bit more research on what may have worked best for my learning style. I think that maybe an online course may not have been for me. Like I said, I'll talk about that more in my experience video because I don't want this video to be more lengthy than it has to be. But next, after you're self-studying, if you feel like you need more help, I would suggest looking into a prep course. The last thing I want to say about preparing for the LSAT and just studying is to create a realistic LSAT study schedule. So don't say that you're going to study 7 hours a day and then following that you're going to take a break and then study 7 more hours. That is completely unrealistic and it's kind of a waste of breath. Why say something when you know you're not going to do it? Make a realistic study schedule. So that means maybe you'll do 3 hours when you wake up, and then in the evening you'll do 3 more hours, or you'll do 2 more hours. Don't do more than you can really bear, because that's not going to do anything but give you an apathy to the test and make you not really want to study for it. So be realistic with yourself, set realistic expectations, set attainable goals, and you should be fine. Okay, so my next video will just be LSAT resources. There are so many resources out there online, in the library, on your cell phone. The resources are honestly endless. So I'll talk about some of the resources that I used and some of the helpful things that kind of helped, redundant, and some of the helpful things that I utilized during my LSAT studying process. So if you guys have any questions, comments, doubts, worries, or concerns about studying for the LSAT, let me know. I'm there to help you in any way that I can. Thank you guys for listening. Bye.